We're talking to Dr. DPadgett from Tennessee State University, and the topic is chocolate cities in crises. And of course, Dr. Padgett, before we had our first commercial break, we promised that we'd give you an opportunity to identify the cities that you designate as chocolate cities, and to say something about each of those cities in reference to the crisis situation that you found through your study.
Okay, well, first I'll start off with New Orleans. Now, New Orleans is somewhat unique. It was unique as far as the cities that I've been looking at in terms of, in the 9 years that we've been ranking cities in Black Enterprise, New Orleans has never made one of the best cities. But New Orleans is one of the cities in the U.S. that has one of the largest percentages of African-American population, at least before Hurricane Katrina. Now, with less than half of the population back and a lot of the African-Americans not going back there, we don't really know what the population looks like right now demographically. As I mentioned before, I will be going down to the Bayou Classic next weekend, and we'll have a chance to look around. I've been to New Orleans twice since Hurricane Katrina, and it's really not the same place. What has happened is the working class is not there because they've been priced out of housing. There are those who lost their houses, but a lot of the renters whose rental properties were rebuilt now are facing having to pay $200, $300, $400 more a month in rent because the insurance rates went up on the landlords, and so they just passed that along to the renters. And so the diaspora from New Orleans who might want to come back and rent, they just can't afford to do it. And so that's very visible, especially when you look at some of the service sectors. But of course, New Orleans with Katrina has all kinds of problems, but they were at one time the murder capital of the United States, even before Katrina. They had all kinds of problems with their police force being corrupt, and even the police force was actually engaged directly in the drug business. They also had problems with their notorious problems with schools, which was one thing that we found across the board when we looked at all these cities, was that people in general, Black people, were not satisfied with their schools. And we are almost very much predominantly in public schools, and that's one big problem. Now, in terms of public schools, I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland, and my mother taught for almost 40 years in that system. And so moving on to Baltimore, Baltimore is a city that didn't make the first list in 2001, made the list, I think it was number 10 in 2004, didn't make it in 2007, largely because of the crime. Baltimore is known for crime. I mean, every TV show about Baltimore, Homicide, The Wire, The Corner, just shows that this city, they had a segment of American Gangster about the heroin trade in Baltimore, and that some of the statistics you hear coming out of Baltimore, where you have 50% of African-American males being unemployed, 1 out of every 2 African-American males having some involvement with the criminal justice system. This is Baltimore, Maryland. And so it's a struggle there, because what's interesting is you have Baltimore, which has some of the highest percentages of people on public assistance. Then one county to the south is Howard County, which is one of the wealthiest counties in the United States in terms of income. And so it's a strange juxtaposition there. But again, Baltimore's biggest problem is crime, and also, again, education. And growing up there, the big change I saw was during the 1980s when the crack cocaine came. I mean, heroin, you know, I didn't see that, but that had an impact. But I saw what crack did to the city. I mean, all of a sudden you had guns and gun violence, and just the kind of violence that would hit anybody, anywhere, at any time. It wasn't this kind of back alley or somebody getting knocked in the head at night violence. I mean, broad daylight, innocent bystander walking down the street, there's a shootout, and some poor child that didn't have anything to do with anything is dead. And so Baltimore's leadership, we've gone through several mayors and several police chiefs who thought they came in with all this enthusiasm, we're going to change the city, and nothing has changed, really. And how Baltimore made it to number 10 in 2004 is an interesting story, but I won't get into it right now. I'll move on to Memphis, which Memphis was on the list in 2001 and 2004 amongst the best cities. Memphis, for some reason, people who live in Memphis love living in Memphis. But one thing that we did this year differently was we actually created a formula where we weighted the Black Enterprise readers' opinions about the quality of life of their cities with real data. And so when we did that, Memphis dropped out, primarily because of the crime. Memphis has one of the highest crime rates of any city in the United States.
As bad as Baltimore, you believe?
Probably about on par with Baltimore. But it was definitely far worse than any of the cities that we had on the list in 04 and 07. Actually, in 2001, we did things a little bit differently. It was more qualitative, and that's why we had some of the cities that probably, like Philadelphia and Chicago and Detroit, that probably never should have been on there. But when we did it more scientifically in 2004 and 2007, we got a much better pick of cities. But Memphis, again, one of the things that is interesting about Memphis, even though it has all the problems with crime and there are a lot of jobs leaving Memphis, and the school system is, again, notoriously bad, there's a high percentage of black home ownership in Memphis. In fact, one of the highest amongst all of our cities. Just anecdotally, I know people who black people who tried to start businesses here in Nashville, and because of the good old boy and lack participation we have here, they weren't successful. Moved the business to Memphis, and it took off because you have so many African Americans within the government and in places of power that they can get people those government contracts, that they can get people access to opportunity, and that just doesn't happen in Nashville, which is not a chocolate city. So while on one hand, in chocolate cities such as Memphis, you have the problems, but if you're in business, if you're entrepreneurial, there are a whole lot more opportunities for a person to become successful, and I think that's what put Memphis on the list. Now, Atlanta was #1 in 2004, and it was in second place this year. In fact, Atlanta has been the most consistent high performer. It was #2 in 2001, #2 in 2004, and #1 in 2004, #2 this year.
Okay, Dr. Padgett, let's stop here with Atlanta for this second commercial break. After we come back, we'll pick up at that and let you continue this discussion. We'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break.
If I hadn't been at this